Subscribe to LearnCap and hit the bell icon to get notified.
So friends, next there are a few minor changes in the return filing chapter. There's an amendment in section 44. Now friends, under section 44 an annual return has to be filed. The due date for filing an annual return happens to be 31st of December following the end of the financial year. Say for example, for financial year 2019-20, the due date for filing annual return GSTR 9 for financial year 19-20 happens to be 31st of December 2020. Now friends, if at all the government wants to extend this due date, there is no provision under section 44 to extend the due dates. Friends, for the returns which are filed under section 39, say for example you have GSTR 3B which you are going to file under section 39. Now friends, for the returns which are being filed under section 39, there is already a provision which is there under section 39 where the commissioner can notify the extension of due dates. But there was no such provision under section 44 which enabled the government to extend the due dates for filing an annual return. So whatever extensions had been given in the past for financial year 17-18, for financial year 18-19 for annual returns, all those extensions are because of an order which was issued under section 172. There was no specific provision under section 44 where the due dates could have been just extended by issuing a notification. It had to come via an order. So now friends, section 44 is amended to that effect, wherein section 44 itself has got the powers where a commissioner could notify the extension of due dates of filing an annual return. So the commissioner may, on the recommendations of GST Council, extend the time limit for a class of registered persons. So friends, it is nothing technical. Earlier the government used to use section 172, pass an order, and then the annual returns due dates were being extended. Now an order is not required. A notification by the commissioner would be sufficient to extend the due dates of annual return. The next one is as regards as a composition taxable person is concerned. Friends, a composition taxable person pays his taxes quarterly, CMP 08. He files his GSTR 4 annually. Now friends, both these CMP 08 and GSTR 4, so far whatever he has been doing, it was because of a notification which was issued under section 148. For a class of registered person, the government could specify certain special mechanisms wherein the payment of taxes, it is not by a return, it is by a statement, CMP 08. Filing of return GSTR 4, from quarterly it was converted into one return per annum. Now friends, this was happening through a special notification which was issued under section 148. Now these provisions have been brought into the section itself. So you have section 39 subsection 7 which tells you a composition taxable person has to pay the taxes quarterly, and read along with rule number 62 wherein it states that a composition taxable person has to file GSTR 4 once in a year. The next one is 35 subsection 5, audit of a registered person. So any registered person whose aggregate turnover, section 35 subsection 5 tells you any registered person whose aggregate turnover exceeds 2 crore rupees has to get its books of accounts audited and submit it along with the reconciliation statement. So friends, audited annual financial statements which is audited by a CA or CWA, and reconciliation statement in form GSTR 9C. Now friends, what is the scope of reconciliation statement? This reconciliation statement would reconcile the differences which are there between the values which are declared in the annual return and the values which are already there in the audited annual financial statements. So there could be differences for many reasons. The differences between GSTR 9 and the differences between audited annual financial statements, all these differences needs to be reconciled, and a reconciliation statement needs to be filed in GSTR 9C. So much we are already aware. Now friends, what is the amendment which has come? And friends, before we discuss this amendment, the Department of Central Government, State Government, Local Authority whose books of accounts is already audited by Comptroller and Auditor General of India, or if it is audited in case of a local authority, it is audited by an auditor who is appointed by the local authority under the respective laws. These persons need not file GSTR 9C. Reconciliation statement was exempted from them. So far there is no change. Now the changes, there is one more person who has been added to the list who need not file his reconciliation statement in GSTR 9C. So friends, it tells you the foreign airline companies. According to the provisions of the Companies Act, a foreign airline company with respect to its operations in India, it need not prepare a profit and loss account and balance sheet. So now friends, please understand, when a profit and loss account and balance sheet is not required to be prepared in accordance with the Companies Act, when a profit and loss account and balance sheet is not required to be prepared in the accordance with the provisions of the Companies Act, how do we prepare a reconciliation statement? How can an auditor prepare a reconciliation statement? Because reconciliation is a difference. You have to resolve the difference between the annual return and audited annual financial statements. So now friends, when there is no profit and loss account balance sheet, there are no financial statements which are present. So there is no possibility of preparing a reconciliation statement. So therefore friends, these companies who are relaxed under the Companies Act that they need not prepare profit and loss account and balance sheet, a parallel relaxation is also given under the GST law, wherein they need not give or they need not furnish the reconciliation statement. However, in accordance with the Companies Act, they are mandated to submit a statement of receipts and payments. According to the Companies Act, they need not prepare a P&L balance sheet. However, with respect to its Indian operations, they are mandated to prepare a statement of receipts and payments, and that needs to be certified. That needs to be authenticated by a practicing CA in India. So now friends, parallelly, the similar exemption is there in GST as well. As regards this reconciliation statement is concerned, since there is no profit and loss account balance sheet which is being prepared, so therefore naturally reconciliation statement cannot be prepared. Hence, these foreign airline companies are exempted from submitting GSTR 9C or by preparing GSTR 9C. However, they have to furnish, with respect to its Indian operations, they have to furnish statement of receipts and payments. So friends, foreign airline companies which are covered under section 381 subsection 1 of the Companies Act, they are not required to file GSTR 9C provided, it is conditional exemption, provided that statement of receipts and payments for the financial year in respect of its Indian operations authenticated by a practicing CA in India is submitted for each GSTIN. So foreign airline company, the number of GSTINs it is having in India, so many statements of receipts and payments it needs to be furnished. It has to be submitted for each GSTN, and now the most important point comes by 30th September of the succeeding financial year. So friends, the due date is not 31st of December. This receipts and payments statement needs to be submitted by 30th of September of the succeeding financial year. The next amendment is in the area of exemption. Friends, there is only one entry which has been amended over here, and that entry is with regard to long-term lease of land. Long-term lease of land for 30 years or more. Now friends, let's discuss the background of this. Now friends, as regards as long-term lease of land is concerned, as regards as GST is there, it is a supply of service. Long-term lease of land, it is a supply of service according to Schedule 2. And friends, in few of the states for long-term lease of land, even stamp duty gets attracted. In few of the states, let's say in the state of Punjab, for long-term lease of land for 30 years and above, even stamp duty gets attracted. Now friends, please understand that just because stamp duty is getting attracted, it doesn't mean that GST cannot be levied. There is a levy of GST as well, and according to the respective state stamp duty laws, there is a levy of stamp duty as well. So now friends, this we have already seen that just because you are paying stamp duty, it doesn't mean that GST cannot be levied. It doesn't mean that GST cannot be levied. There was a circular which stated that on the pagadi amount which is being received, that is the sale of tenancy rights. On this pagadi amount what is being received, even though stamp duty is being paid in the state of Maharashtra, still there is a levy of GST. So the thing which you are trying to discuss is, just because you are paying stamp duty doesn't mean that GST cannot be levied. Now coming back to this discussion, in case of long-term lease of land, according to GST law, it is a supply of service. There is a levy of GST. Now also it attracts stamp duty according to the relevant state stamp duty laws. So friends, there was a discussion in GST Council that this attracts two taxes. So let us exempt GST. Let us exempt GST on long-term lease of land wherever stamp duty is getting attracted. There is a levy, but the lawmakers, the council members just wanted, there was a proposal, there was a discussion that let us just exempt GST since stamp duty is also getting attracted on this transaction. However, a consensus was not achieved. There was a proposal in the council, all of the council members did not agree for it. And at the end, what the council decided was, let us give an exemption, but to start with, let us have a very narrow exemption. Let us exempt long-term lease of land, but not by all the lessors. Only government-controlled entities. If they are leasing out long-term They are leasing out their land for a long term, and that too if they are leasing out industrial plots. So industrial plots, and the lessor should be a government controlled entity. If they are leasing it out, then let us exempt it. Let us start with a very narrow exemption. As and when time passes on, let us relax this exemption, let us broaden this exemption, and eventually we will try and cover even other entities who are leasing out this land for any purpose. To start with, let us start with government controlled entities for industrial plots. So with that attempt, they gave an exemption stating that if industrial plots are being leased out by government controlled entities, that means wherever the share of the government in those entities, let it be central government, state government, union territory, the share of the government in those entities wherever it is 50% and above. So that means if those entities are the lessors and if they are giving out industrial plots, then the exemption would apply. Other than those persons, if any other person is leasing it out, or if they are leasing it out, that is these government controlled entities is leasing it out, but it is not an industrial plot, then the exemption would not apply, and that would attract GST also and stamp duty also. So this was the broad agenda with which we started, and as they promised that eventually let us relax this exemption, let us broaden the scope of this exemption. So by an amendment which we are going to discuss now, they have broadened the scope of the exemption. And how have they broadened it? They say that now if the lessor happens to be an entity, the lessor of these industrial plots, if they happen to be an entity wherein the government has a stake of 20% or above, the government has a stake of 20% and above, even then the exemption would apply. So friends, earlier it was 50%, now they say it is 20%. Naturally, the number of entities, the number of lessors would be more over here. Please understand, don't get confused by diluting the control. Earlier they told that an entity in which the government is having 50% stake, if that entity is leasing out an industrial plot, it would be exempted. Now they say that if there is an entity in which the government is having 20% or more stake, if this entity is leasing out industrial plots, it would be exempted. So now, since the control is diluted, there are more number of lessors who are there in this 20% bracket. There are more number of lessors, there are more number of entities which are there wherein the government has a stake of more than 20% and above. So friends, by this way, they have broadened the scope of exemption. Of course, with certain conditions, we are going to see them. So let's have a look at the entry. So long-term lease, that is 30 years or more, of industrial plots or plots for development of infrastructure for financial business. This remains the same, there is no change. By state government industrial development corporations, which means your SIDCO, or by any other entity which is having 20% or more ownership of government. Fine. So wherever there is an entity which the lessor should either be a SIDCO or the lessor should be an entity wherein the government has a stake of 20% or more. If they happen to be the lessor, and this lease should be given to an industrial unit. It should be given to an industrial unit or to the developers in any industrial or financial business area. So friends, the lessor is fixed, the duration of the lease is fixed, the lessee is fixed, and the nature of the plot is fixed. If all these four criteria are cumulatively satisfied, only then the exemption would hold good. And friends, the consideration which is going to be received for this long-term lease of land, it should be on one-time upfront payment called as either premium, salami, cost price, developmental charges, etc. Here also there is a no change, friends. The only change which is there is they have tried to include more number of lessors who can enjoy this exemption. Earlier it was government controlled entities, and there it control meant that 50% and above. Now they say that if the lessor happens to be an entity where the stake of the government is even 20% or above, so more number of entities would get covered over here. So therefore more number of lessors would enjoy this exemption. However, there are conditions. So now friends, there is an explanation before we go to the conditions. The explanation tells you, for the purpose of this exemption, the government shall have 20% or more ownership in the entity, either directly or through an entity which is wholly owned by the government. So either directly 20% or through an entity wholly owned by the government, even if that is having 20% or above, still the lessor would be eligible for grant of exemption. Now friends, there are certain conditions if one wants to enjoy these exemptions. The condition is, the leased plots shall be used for the purpose for which they are allotted. That is, industrial or financial activity in an industrial or financial business area. This purpose has to be maintained only if the plot is given for this specific purpose. The exemption can be enjoyed. Now friends, who has to enforce this? The state government concerned shall monitor and enforce the above condition. So the respective state government is responsible to see that whether this plot for which it has, the purpose for which it has been let out, for which an exemption is claimed under GST, whether the plot is being used for the same purpose by the same person to whom it is being given. Now friends, there could be a scenario where, let's say an entity is there. There is an entity which is, and it is a specified entity, that is the government is having 20% or more of stake in it. Now that entity is giving out a land on long-term lease to an industrial unit. Now friends, here the conditions are satisfied. Exemption is claimed. Now friends, that again industrial unit which has taken this land on lease, if it is trying to change the purpose, that means it is not using it for industrial purpose, the exemption would not hold good. Another scenario, that lessee which is there, if it is subleasing the land to another lessee, and now friends, if that person who has taken the land on lease, so now friends, here there is a lessor, that is say SIDCO. There is a lessee which is an industrial unit, exemption available. Now here again this land is given on sublease. Now friends, as regards as the sublease is concerned, here if the purpose is changed, that means as regards as the sublease is concerned, in this sublease, if this land is no longer going to be used for the set purpose for which exemption was granted, the exemption would be lifted. So now friends, as regards as this exemption is concerned, here the exemption would be lifted. So wherever the condition, this notification condition further states you that whenever it is going to be subletted, this sublease agreement also should carry a clause that the land has to be used only for the specified purpose. If that is not being used for the specified purpose, exemption would be lifted. And friends, here the new point is, the very new point in this exemption notification is, the moment the exemption is lifted, all these three persons, the lessor, the lessee and the sublessee, would be jointly and severally liable. They would be jointly and severally liable to discharge the GST liability had this exemption not been there. So friends, here the agreement which is going to be entered between this lessee and this sublessee should also carry a point that this land is going to be used only for the specified purposes, otherwise even the sublessee would be liable. Friends, now this is the first time what we are seeing that under GST normally the person who is liable to pay taxes is generally the supplier. Let us ignore the reverse charge cases. Other than that, the person who is liable to pay taxes to the government is the supplier. The supplier can collect it from the recipient and pay, and even if he is not collecting it from the recipient and paying, ultimately it is the supplier who is going to be responsible. The government will not or cannot collect the taxes from the recipient. Now friends, this is the first case where other than reverse charge, therefore this is not a reverse charge case. For cases other than reverse charge, the supplier and the recipient are going to be jointly liable if the conditions are not met with. So let's have a look. In case of any violation or subsequent change of land use due to any reason whatsoever, the original lessor, the original lessee, as well as any subsequent lessee or buyer or owner shall be jointly and severally liable to pay such amount of GST as would have been payable but for the exemption which was there. The lease agreement entered into by the original lessor with the original lessee or subsequent lessee or sublessee, as well as any subsequent lease or sale agreements for the lease or sale of such plots to subsequent lessees or buyers or owners, shall incorporate in the terms and conditions the fact that GST was exempted on long-term lease of the plots by the original lessor to the original lessee, subject to the above condition being followed, and that the parties to the said agreements undertake to comply with the same. So even if the sublessee is violating the condition, the GST exemption would be lifted and all these parties in this chain would be jointly and severally liable. The next change in the area of e-way bill. Now friends, as regards as e-way bill amendment is concerned, this amendment has been introduced with the objective of increasing the compliance. That is your return filing. So friends, there are many registered persons who do not file their returns on time. So the government, in order to increase the compliance rate of those registered persons, the government has said that if there is any registered person who has defaulted, the return filing for a set period. What is that set period? We'll be discussing that. If there's a registered person who has defaulted the return filing for the set period, he would not be allowed to generate an e-way bill. So therefore, if he wants to generate an e-way bill, after having defaulted the return filing for a set period, first he has to file his returns and only then he'll be in a position to generate his e-way bill. Now what would happen by this? Friends, as regards as e-way bill is concerned, wherever e-way bill is required and if a registered person is not able to generate an e-way bill, he will not be able to deliver the goods to his customers. So his business would take a direct hit. Why would he not be able to deliver the goods to his customers? If he is sending the goods without the cover of an e-way bill, his vehicle might be intercepted and he might be asked to pay taxes and penalties. So now friends, with this objective, this provision, this amendment has been brought in that a registered person who is defaulting the return filing for a set period, he would not be able to generate an e-way bill. Now friends, Rule 138E, this is the rule which has been come in. Now friends, let's have a look at this. It would not be so simple how the provision what we have discussed on a very bird's eye view, on a broader sense. Let's have a look into the wordings of this rule. Notwithstanding anything contained in sub-rule 1 of Rule 138. So Rule 138 sub-rule 1 tells you that a registered person who is causing movement of goods for an amount greater than threshold, he is required to furnish information in Part A of e-way bill 01. Now this 138E is notwithstanding anything which is containing in 138 sub-rule 1. That means whatever is written over there, a registered person should mandatorily generate an e-way bill. Whatever is written over there, forget it. Read this rule now. It tells you not overriding whatever was written in 138 sub-rule 1. No person including a consignor, consignee, transporter, eco or a courier agency shall be allowed to furnish the information in Part A of Form GST EWV 01 in respect of a registered person, whether as a supplier or a recipient who has defaulted the return filing for this said period. Now friends, what is the said period? We'll be discussing that. But before that, let us have a careful analysis at the first part of this rule. It tells you that no person including a consignor, consignee, transporter, eco or a courier agency shall be allowed to furnish information in Part A of e-way bill 01 in respect of a registered person, whether as a supplier or a recipient who is a return filing defaulter. Now friends, to understand this, let's take a matrix. Now let's say there is a consignor A. There is a consignor A who wants to deliver the goods to consignee B. There's a consignor A who wants to deliver the goods to a consignee B. The defaulter is A. That means A has not furnished the returns for the set period. He is a return filing defaulter. A wants to generate an e-way bill. A wants to generate an e-way bill. Can A do so? Is the question. Now friends, I repeat the statement again. Please carefully concentrate. Consignor is A. Consignee is B. Return filing defaulter is A. E-way bill, A wants to generate it. Can he generate it? The answer is simple no. He cannot generate an e-way bill. Agreed? So therefore, e-way bill cannot be generated. Once he makes the return filing default good, of course he can generate it. Now friends, what A thinks is, now I am a return filing defaulter. I want to deliver the goods to my consignee. I am not in a position to generate an e-way bill. Never mind. Let me ask my consignee to generate an e-way bill. Let me say that the consignee is the registered person who's causing movement of goods. Let him generate an e-way bill. Anyhow, the goods have to go to the destination. Let it be generated by the consignor or by the consignee. The consignee could be a registered person who's causing the movement of goods. Let him generate an e-way bill. So I will ask my consignee to generate an inward e-way bill. Friends, please understand, Rule 138 doesn't tell you that the consignor should generate an e-way bill. Rule 138 simply tells you registered person who is causing the movement of goods has to generate an e-way bill. Now let me term this contract in such a way that the consignee is a registered person who is causing the movement of goods. Let him generate an e-way bill. I am not able to generate. Now friends, take in scenario number 2, the consignor is A, the consignee is B, the defaulter is A. Same situation, nothing is changed. But the change is, now B wants to generate an e-way bill. The consignee will be generating an inward e-way bill. Can B do so? Let's have a look at the wordings, friends. Notwithstanding anything contained in subrule 1 of 138, no person, now let us leave consignor, including a consignee. No person, including a consignee, notwithstanding anything contained in subrule 1 of rule 138, no person, including a consignee, shall be allowed to furnish the information in part A of GST EWB 01 in respect of a registered person as a supplier who is a defaulter. Now friends, here this person Mr. B, who is not a defaulter, he wants to generate an e-way bill and furnish information in part A of e-way bill 01 in respect of a registered person who is a defaulter as a supplier. He also cannot generate an e-way bill. So now friends, the scenario number 2, e-way bill cannot be generated. Here also e-way bill cannot be generated. So now friends, whether the defaulter is generating an e-way bill or the consignee who is not a defaulter is generating an e-way bill, both the provisions are covered over here. None of them can generate an e-way bill. Now friends, scenario number 3. Consignor is A. Consignor is A. Consignee is B. Consignor is A. Consignee is B. Defaulter is B. That means the recipient to whom the goods are going to go, he is a defaulter. He is a registered person who has not furnished his returns. Please understand, I want to send the goods to you. I am not a defaulter. I am a regular compliant assessee. I want to deliver these goods to you. You are a registered person and you have not filed your GST returns. Now friends, when I want to deliver these goods to a recipient, to a consignee who is a defaulter, can I generate an e-way bill? Consignor is A, consignee is B, defaulter is B. E-way bill to be generated by A, is it possible? The answer is no, that is also not possible. Please have a look at the wordings. The wordings tells you, notwithstanding anything contained in 138 subrule 1, no person including a consignor. Now we are talking about the consignor generating an e-way bill. No person including a consignor shall be allowed to furnish the information in part A in respect of a registered person as a recipient. So now friends, here the registered person recipient is a defaulter, then also e-way bill cannot be generated. So now friends, here also e-way bill cannot be generated. Please understand, the person, the supplier is not a defaulter. Just because the recipient is a defaulter, even the supplier cannot generate an e-way bill. Scenario number 4. Consignor is A, consignee is B, defaulter is B. Can B generate an e-way bill? Of course, the answer is no. B also here cannot generate an e-way bill. He himself is the defaulter. Now friends, having fed up of all of these things, what do they plan? They say the consignor is A, the consignee is B. A wants to send the goods to B. The defaulter, let it be any person. Let A be the defaulter or let B be the defaulter. The consignor and consignee ask the transporter to generate an e-way bill. See, I cannot generate, you cannot generate. Let us ask the transporter to generate. Can the transporter generate an e-way bill? Yes. If the transporter is authorized by the consignor or the consignee, the registered person who is causing movement of goods, he can very well generate an e-way bill. They ask the transporter to generate an e-way bill. Now, can e-way bill be generated by the transporter? Please have a look at the wordings again. Notwithstanding anything contained in 138 subrule 1, no person including a transporter, e-commerce operator or a courier agency shall be allowed to furnish information in part A in respect of a registered person either as a supplier or as the recipient. So friends, here transporter also cannot generate an e-way bill. So friends, in short, the summary of the entire discussion what we have had, that whosever information you are punching in part A, you furnish the information of the consignor, you furnish the information of the consignee. Whoever is causing the movement of goods, we are not bothered. The consignor and the consignee, the supplier and the recipient, if either of them is a defaulter, neither the consignor, nor the consignee, nor the transporter, nor the e-commerce operator, nor the courier agency, would be in a position to generate an e-way bill because part A itself cannot be furnished. Now friend, what is the default period? Here the default period we go and read. Whether as a supplier or a recipient who, being a person paying tax under section 10, has not furnished the statement in GST CMP 08 for 2 consecutive quarters. That means if he is a composition taxable person and he has not furnished CMP 08 for 2 consecutive quarters, and as we all know, CMP 08 is a statement which is required for payment of taxes by a composition taxable person. It is not a return. Please understand, it is not a return, it is a statement through which a composition taxable person pays taxes quarterly. If that is not furnished for 2 consecutive quarters, then e-way bill cannot be generated. Being a person other than a person specified in clause A, that means other than a composition taxable person, the regular person, he has not furnished the returns. He has not furnished the returns for a consecutive period of 2 months. That means if there's a person, a regular person, if he has not furnished GSTR 3B consecutively for 2 months, e-way bill cannot be generated. Friends, does this point cover GSTR 1? The answer is no, because GSTR 1 is a statement of outward supplies. It is details of outward supplies and it is not a return. Here what they are talking about is return. But please don't cherish. Read the next point. It tells you, being a person other than a person specified in clause A, that is other than your composition taxable person, has not furnished statement of outward supplies for any 2 months or quarters as the case may be. So friends, as we all know, GSTR 1, it could be filed monthly, and by certain selected registered persons, it could be filed quarterly as well. So if they have not filed it for 2 months or 2 quarters, e-way bill cannot be generated. Friends, the point which needs to be observed over here is, as regards as the first part is concerned, it tells you for 2 consecutive quarters CMP 08 if it is not being filed. The next one, being a person other than the person of composition taxable person, he has not furnished returns for 2 consecutive periods. But friends, as regards as GSTR 1 is concerned, the word consecutive is missing. The word consecutive is missing. So here it tells you that if he has not furnished the statement of outward supplies for any 2 months or any 2 quarters, so it need not be consecutively. Let's suppose you did not file for the month of April. You filed it for the month of May. Does the portal allow you? The answer is yes. As regards as GSTR 1 is concerned, it allows you. But for GSTR 3B, it doesn't allow you. 3B, without filing the returns for the preceding tax periods, you cannot file the returns for the current tax periods, but it is not so for GSTR 1. GSTR 1, if you have not filed the returns for the month of April, still you can go ahead and file the returns, file the GSTR 1 for the month of June. So now friends, here as regards as GSTR 1 is concerned, even if you have not filed for 2 months, it is not consecutive months, 2 months or 2 quarters. Let's say you did not file the fund for the month of April. You filed it for the month of May. Again, you did not file it for the month of June. Now for 2 periods, GSTR 1 is remaining unfiled. You will not be in a position to generate an e-way bill. So friends, as regards as 3B and CMP 08 is concerned, it is 2 consecutive periods. As regards as GSTR 1 is concerned, it is any 2 periods. Now friends, when this blockage would be lifted, the moment you comply this, the moment you say that I have filed the returns. So whenever, even if your returns are remaining unfiled, for less than these 2 consecutive periods or less than 2 periods, you will be in a position to file the returns. Let's suppose for 2 consecutive periods, I did not file my GSTR 3B. And today, since I am not in a position to generate an e-way bill, I file my GSTR 3B for 1 month. Am I in a position to generate an e-way bill? The answer is yes. I file it today. From tomorrow, I will be in a position to generate an e-way bill because now my 2 consecutive returns are not pending. Now this blockage is being lifted automatically by the system itself once you file the returns, once you make your default good. But however friends, you might be in a financial crunch, you might be in a position, you might not be, you will be having shortage of funds, you are not in a position to pay your taxes and file the returns. So therefore, but still you want to deliver the goods, you want an e-way bill to be generated, there's an option which is given. You can go and make a manual request to the commissioner and he may permit you. He may permit you under special circumstances to generate an e-way bill even though your return filing defaulter. So now friends, this upliftment of blockage of e-waybill, you not being allowed to generate an e-waybill, one is automated if you make the default good. Second one, it is a manual request which needs to be made to the proper officer. So provided that the commissioner may, on receipt of an application from a registered person, inform GST EWB 05 on sufficient cause being shown and for the reasons to be recorded in writing by order, inform EWB 06, allow furnishing of the said information in part A, subject to such conditions and restrictions as may be specified by him. So you have to electronically make an application, manually physically go and meet the officer, and then he would permit you to generate an e-waybill on certain special circumstances. Provided further that no order rejecting the request will be made without giving an opportunity of being heard. So that is what I said you have to make an application and go meet the officer. If he wants to reject it, he cannot reject it without meeting you. So principles of natural justice needs to be followed. Provided also that the permission granted or rejected by the Commissioner of State Tax shall be deemed to be granted or as the case may be rejected by the Commissioner. So friends, here also you have the cross empowerment provisions. If the state officer is allowing you, it is deemed that the central officer has also allowed you, and if the state officer is rejecting it, it is deemed that the central officer has also rejected it. Friends, we have come to an end of this amendment lectures. I wish you all the very best for your examination. If you have any queries, you can write to me over here. Friends, please don't waste time. Please don't be anxious. Please don't lose hope. Things will return to normalcy sooner or later. Till then, remember the Shiva's Damaru. Keep practicing. All the very best for your examination.
Subscribe to LearnCap and hit the bell icon to get notified.